Everybody, welcome to the Ghost Carolina Performance Podcast. We're super excited to have Casey Mulholland on here with Kinetic Pro. Casey, welcome, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to do this.
Yeah, of course. We've known each other for a while now through our mutual ties over at Wake Forest. But man, just want to give you the floor and let you talk about who you are, your experience in baseball and the game, and and talk about Kinetic Pro a little bit.
Yeah, appreciate that. No, it has been a minute. I know we crossed paths a long time ago, a few times, and then kind of settled up and got to chat a while. I guess it was maybe last year before. So, it's been fun. But I'm the founder, lead developer at Kinetic Pro Performance out of Tampa, Florida. Been in this since 2018. We founded the company and started post-playing career. I played for the Dodgers for a quick second. Started post-playing career, looking for answers to why I got hurt during my playing career. I was supposed to be a first-round draft pick out of high school. Missed it by about 60 days of Tommy John surgery. And that kind of spurred me into asking a lot of questions about why I do what I do. So I didn't know you could make a career out of asking good questions and collecting data on pitchers. But, I had a good break when I got done playing. I was rehabbing at IMG Academy. It's where I went to high school, and happened to stumble into this biomechanics lab called Modus at the time, and just happened to be the one that was there closest to my spot. So went in, met a guy named Ben Hansen, not a bad first meet there, who was the CTO at the time of Modus, was building the original plans. This is 2016. So he just released the first insert iteration for Modus, tracking throwing workload in baseball. And I asked Ben a famous question. I said, Ben, my strength is the best it's ever been. My mechanics were the best they've ever been. So help me understand, why did I get hurt? And he said, well, I don't know why you got hurt, but there is this thing in considering, and it's how much you do. So we call it workload management. And it was like a light bulb went off. And ever since then, we've been building out technology, working with, players all around the world, and trying to get this message of workload management into the game and change the workload systems that have been sort of governing our game for quite a while, and still doing it. So it's been fun.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain all that stuff. For people that have never heard about workload, what is workload? Why is it important? What encompasses all of that?
Yeah, so super broad question. I'll simple it down, narrow it down. Workload management is really, it comes in two forms, right? So workload is how much load is being placed upon the body when we do an activity. So when we're talking about throwing specifically, every throw has an intensity. Every throw has a count. So if I have 10 throws in the day, I have 10 throws. Each of those throws are at different intensities. So the easy way to say it is there's a work expended across that throwing day. And people know this today, whether they realize, what throwing workload is or not. They realize this today by their Apple Watch, or by their, Oura Ring, or by their, in the early 2000s, right? That we've been doing this for a while as a society. We've been using wearable technology to track activity. And so workload management is simply the load that your body is experiencing through a specific task. You can measure that specific task. So if it's walking, if it's running, if it's heart rate, if it's a certain movement of the body, workload is the measurement of that. And then when you talk about workload management, we're trying to determine and manage how much of that work is placed upon your body. I know that when you do too much work, your body's going to get hurt or potentially break down, or it's going to have a negative reaction to that much work. If I don't do enough, then I won't see the results I want either. So very simplistic manner, 10,000 foot view. That is what workload management is.
That's another great description. I think a lot of people, like me being a performance coach and things, like, people conceptually understand that you put a stimulus on the body adapts, we continue to go there. People understand that from like a weightlifting, a sprinting, conditioning, whatever the case may be, for whatever reason. And obviously you've made a career out of this. From a throwing standpoint, I would argue a swing standpoint as well. Like, people just don't take that into account at some of the lower levels. And I think it's such a great thing that you're doing. And it can be very simplistic, but it can also be very complex. So what are some things that you really enjoy, or that you may actually, before we get into that, let's talk about acute and chronic workload for the people that don't understand what that is. How do we differentiate those? Because I don't want to pass over that yet.
Yeah, well, I'll take even a step back from that real quick, and then kind of like bring that to scope. So let's drag everybody that maybe hasn't had experience with this yet. Let's drag them into this, and then we can kind of get into the weeds a little bit on especially something like acute workload, how we measure that, or how we kind of do that. But I've said this before in presenting at Wake this past year at the bridge. I said, use this example, and first kind of publicly announced this example, but it's one that I've been using for years. Every player that's come through our facility and done an assessment, we always ask this question, and it's so intuitive, but it makes me laugh. Like, everybody's a workload expert. Whether you know what ACR is, or whether you know how to calculate a one-day workload or whatever, you are a workload expert, and I can prove it. We all have some awareness of this. And so I use this marathon example a lot. And I say, what if I asked you to run a marathon today? And I asked most of the population, I go, are you ready to run a marathon today? Right. And anybody like myself, I go, absolutely not. No way. Right. I love Chick-fil-A, so probably not going to run a marathon anytime soon. Okay, great. We've established you can't run a marathon. Why? And most people go, well, I haven't trained. I haven't built up for it. And you go, okay, well, let's stop there for a second. You've acknowledged the fact that you need to build up to handle the load that you're going to face in that marathon. And so, okay, great. That's awesome. We're already a step ahead of where baseball's at just by that statement alone, right? We'll come back to that. But so now the second part is, okay, great. Let's start talking about how much time you need to build up, because we have to get built up to run that marathon. I go, all right, how about 8 months? Could you do it in 8 months? And, we always go, yeah, 8 months sounds pretty good. I think I could do that. That sounds great. And I go, okay, awesome. How about 1 month? And they go, oh no, definitely not 1 month. We can do it 1 month. And I go, all right, well, so we're somewhere between 1 month and 8 months is our build-up time. How do you know that? You've never run a marathon before. And they go, oh, well, I've a little bit run a mile or something. I can kind of, in my head, I go, okay, perfect. You need to build up. You need time to build up. The more time, the better to build up for that load. And okay, great. We've started to establish some key principles to workload management. I go, all right, so last series of questions. I go, we're going to start our training this week. Let's go ahead. Week 1, we're going to start our training Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If I gave you a half a mile on Monday, a mile on Wednesday, and a half a mile on Friday, is that a good starting point to the program? And most kids go, yeah, I could do that. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Think about it for a second. Half mile sounds pretty good though. I go, okay, week 2 on our program now. We established week 1's great. Half mile, half mile, half mile. Week 2, if I went 10 miles on Monday, 10 miles on Wednesday, and 10 miles on Friday. And the kid's like, oh, no, you can't do that. That's impossible. I would never be able to do that. That's too quick. The progression rate's too fast. And I go, interesting. How do you know that? And they're like, well, you just can't do that. And so they know how to calculate it. Again, we all know, like, no parent would push their kid from a half mile. I shouldn't say no, but most parents would not push their kid from a half mile to 10 miles. That's absurd. That's just too much. So these key principles, right? We know we need to build up to handle something, which would be the seasonal load. And we knew from the very onset that we can't progress that too quickly. We need to make sure we gradually, it's called progressive overload. So we want to progressive overload the body to get to that readiness that we're talking about. So to your question about acute and chronic workload, what is that? I'll say very simply, chronic workload is your fitness. Okay, so the easy way to think about this is they're calculating, we take the last month of your training, that training work, that load, and then we calculate that and we say your fitness objectively is X. So if your fitness is high enough to handle that marathon, for example, then your chronic workload, your fitness levels built up high enough to handle that marathon. So same with in season, and we can see this in the data in season. We want to substantially reduce Tommy John surgery in baseball. The month of April is the month we have to mitigate. So the injuries in baseball report, I was one of the 200 interviewed for that this past year, and they released it in December. And pretty much unanimously, look at the data. It's pretty easy to understand. It's the same thing we saw in epidemiology of Major League Baseball in 2013, that the first month of the season is where we see the highest incident rate of injury year over year over year. There's a 2021 paper that came out talking about the COVID season and how guys didn't have enough to build up because they shut down. So the MLB only gave them 1 month to progress. And we saw 3.5 times the elbow injury rate than we've ever seen before. So again, you're seeing this research. It's all pointing to the same thing. We have to build up to handle our marathon, if you want to say it that way. And chronic workload is the thing that we measure to help us get there. Acute workload is how we take the small snippets. So 7 days or 9 days. I prefer a weighted 9-day. We won't get into that too much tonight, but there's different ways to measure these small snippets against the amount of fitness to determine how much you're progressing or regressing in that training. The idea is, again, the big one is chronic workload. If we can properly progress our athletes, we can reach the proper chronic workload or throwing fitness, then we potentially mitigate that high risk of that early season injury spike that we see across the game.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted us to have this conversation right now with, high school baseball starting, college baseball, getting rocking and rolling. The guys are in spring training doing their thing. I think it's a really, really awesome time for us to be having this conversation and bringing all of this stuff to light. We were talking a little bit off air, like, tell us a little bit about like what does, obviously you kind of gave us a little bit about, some of the questions you ask and things like that with your assessments. What does it look like in the off season at your facility down there in Florida?
Yeah. It's sometimes there's a little bit of chaos madness going on, and the way that my brain works and the way we design throwing programs, for example. But wintertime is our busiest period of the year. We had 32 players this past off season come through. Some of them, part-time, full-time, meaning that some of them are coming down for a week and going back home for remote training. Some of them are down full-time for the entire off season. We've had some great arms this year and some great buy-in too. And, with something like what we do and some of the ways that we've pioneered sort of this workload model, reality is you need a strong community of guys really bought in and believing what you do. So, I'll give an example of some of the things that we've sort of established that is different. So one of my closest friends, Dr. Mike Son, now with the Cubs, Mike came down 3 years ago, and one of my proudest moments, didn't even expect it was going to happen, but I expected him to be so impressed with, all of our workload intricacies, the data, the this, the that. And, he said to me, pulls me aside and he goes, this is the first time he's ever at our facility. He goes, hey, you have something really special here. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I kind of pat on my back, right? Okay, great. And he goes, oh, no, you don't realize this, but you've created a language. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, the athletes here, when you tell them you have a 10 today, or you have a 20 today, or you have a 15 today, this is the workload, the day workload, the day load, right? For those of you who are kind of just getting into this, it's the rings on your watch. So when I would tell an athlete, hey, this is how much I want you to do today to quote unquote close your ring. Mike said, you create a language around this. And he goes, you have 14-year-olds literally regurgitating to you back. You want me to do a 15 today. So you want me to do like a 0 to 4 with a catch play. You want me to do plyos, whatever, 4 to 8. You want me to do a short box at this time, or do you want to throw a bullpen that time? How many pitches are we throwing today? That should get me about this. And he goes, dude, that's so crazy that is going on here. He goes, we're at the big league level. And he's like, we're watching guys, we're trying to teach guys that, and we're trying to build and instill that. And he goes, you guys have that. So I'd say one of the big driving factors is, in what we do is, it's one thing to integrate technology, especially something like workload management. It's a whole nother thing to get the community bought in, the process, and then the communication. When a coach asks a kid, hey, how much are you good for this week? Good or bad, that kid's going to know exactly what he has this week and be able to communicate to the T why he has it. And that's something we really pride ourselves in. So I'd say that's, come down the winter, that's what you're going to see at KP.
That's awesome, man. And that's like, that's one of the things that, I'm sure your eyes we've either heard of this happening this week, last week, or we could go find the information if we wanted to. High school kids going out and throwing a bunch of pitches, college guys first start, or coming out of the bullpen throwing an excessive amount of pitches and things like that. And it's like, I'm not here to say if that's right or wrong. Like, I don't know those situations. Maybe it's perfectly fine, but odds are that it's probably not. So like, what are some things that you kind of glazed over a little bit, that the fact of how talented you were and the opportunities that you had coming out of high school? How we have travel teams here. You have our training facility that you know about and things like that. What's something that you would say to a high school kid, a young college player, even somebody that's potentially going to get drafted this year? about workload, how to handle their bodies, and really be able to, like, to that last point, how to communicate that.
Yeah. So I'll say this as a family. So player and family, as a family. If you're a player listening to this, turn to your family and you need to have this discussion. If you're a family, or if your parents are of a player, this is a discussion, and you sit down and talk about very openly with your family, with your coach, etc. How do I plan my year? It's such a remedial question, but it means so much in the grand scheme of things. Planning enough time to build up to be ready for the role that you're going to want to play in season for your team. It's always better to overbuild. I talk about that marathon example. Imagine getting to the start line on marathon day, having built up to run 26 miles, and the starter of the marathon comes out and goes, "Hey, the course is closed, only 5 miles today." You're going to be like, "Well, I'm going to go sprint this 5 miles then, right? I feel good about that. No problem." Okay. If you built yourself up to be a starter, or to throw that kind of workload, then it's easier to come back. But if you're only built up to handle 20 pitches, you can't go out and throw 90 pitches. And to that point, that's what you see a lot with guys. I don't have a problem with guys throwing a lot of pitches early. As a matter of fact, I encourage teams, especially college teams, if that's their competitive edge, if I can get more pitches or more innings out of my frontline guys early in the year while everybody else is trying to build up, and I got my dudes running 90 pitches and they've built up to handle that, they're ready to handle that, that's a competitive advantage. And that's something that most college coaches don't take advantage of. Brian Conger spoke on that back in 2019 at ABCA. I mean, that's been why people don't do that. Yeah, I don't know. But back to the parent and player, it's imperative, especially in your college. You talk about those lower levels where you may have less of a stable of arms. You got to get the most out of your frontline guys. So, but back to the parent and player. Once you've built up and you've planned that time enough to get yourself built up to be ready for season, you need to be really consistent in the schedule. And this time of year is the number one time of year for players. They'll feel a little sore because they didn't build up enough. This is where it starts to go off the rails. They build up. They are a little sore right out of the gate. And they decide to not throw for 2 days after their first start because they're hanging a little bit. The next bullpen, they take it easy and they throw less plyos and they're detraining. And so week 1, that goes by. Week 2, that goes by. They're detraining. And then all of a sudden, they have detrained enough where that workload spikes on them and they end up injured and fatigued and then potentially injured the next time around. So my point is build up for the load that you face. Be super consistent in your schedule week over week over week. Don't let a coach put you in there for 3 innings on a Monday and come back and throw again 3 innings on a Thursday. That doesn't happen anywhere else. Only high school baseball, when you lack the talented arms, or in baseball, when you lack the talented arms, never will you ever see a Friday night starter go ahead and close the game on Friday and at the college level and come back and pitch on Sunday to start the game. That doesn't happen. Your best arm doesn't close the game on Friday. They start the game on Friday and they don't see them out again until the next Friday. Right. So again, be consistent in your routine. If you're in travel ball and you pitch your 1 game for that weekend and it's 3 innings, fine. Come back and throw 3-4 innings the next weekend. It's pretty logical progression. Don't make it chaotic. Monitor all the throws you're doing in the day. Build up to handle what you're going to face in season. You would see the injury rate in baseball substantially shrink if parents and players committed to that, but you just don't see it enough.
Yeah, I agree. What would you say to the parent or player, I guess family unit that we're talking about here, that would say, but so-and-so is there to see him if he throws on, game 1 of the tournament and, whoever is coming to see him the 3rd day, like he says he's ready to throw, like, Casey, can he throw? Like, we got to get this kid recruited.
Right. So 2 things to that. One, well, first off, if a college pitching coach doesn't respect your health enough when you tell him that, you're on a schedule or on a routine. If I'm a college coach, that's what I want to hear from my guy. Like, that's the guy that I'm trying to recruit. I will come find. I got plenty of money in the bank for my college to fly me wherever I want to go. Right. I ain't worried about it. I'll watch you online. I'll track your Twitter. I'll put that out. I'm not worried about that. Yeah. I want my player healthy, especially if I want to recruit you. 2 is, you can't make it about the recruiting process. And I know that's really hard for some parents and players, and it is about the recruiting process. But if you're good enough, they'll find you. And I truly believe that having great people in your corner, if you're good enough, they'll find you. Again, it's easy for me to say from my career because I was a highly touted high school athlete coming out of high school and even into college. I had some attention. But one thing that I learned pretty quickly in my playing career was I didn't have to be perfect every day. I just had to go out and showcase the talent that I had. So, I was always out and trying to not give up any home runs. I was trying to, strike out 12, and oftentimes did that. I pitched well, got enough attention. But it was really hard on myself when I didn't pitch as well as I wanted to. And reality is a lot of scouts actually were waiting for me. They were following me because they wanted to see my failure and see how I handled it. And so don't always look at it as a negative. Good coaches, recruiters will see the talent that you have, and you don't have control over it. Ultimately, that part of the process, you just don't have control over. So go out, do what's right for you, communicate to these coaches. They might be frustrated with you for a second, but if they're really committed to you, if they really want to see you out there for, especially with the portal and everything else today, they got to have an absolute passion for you as a player coming in. And if you don't have that, then that's probably not the place for you. So
couldn't agree more. That's very well said. Since you talked about the portal and just how the landscape of college baseball has changed, let's hit on that a little bit. What is your thought process for high school kids, even college kids at a school they may not want to be at coming out of high school? Like, what's your thought process on how to handle that?
Compete. I think you open the doors for opportunity. The more you compete, quit trying to, I tell our guys all the time, there's bullpens. It sounds terrible, but there's bullpens. I'll get upset and turn the TrackMan on. I'm like, hey, listen, I really want you to be a great pitcher. And we really have to understand what that means. And that doesn't mean just having a great spread on TrackMan. That means being able to utilize that spread effectively. And things swing, right? The pendulum always swings. A couple of years ago, you could have put a great spread together and sent it out to college coach. They probably, gawked all over it and said, hey, this is where I'm recruiting you right now. Today, what a lot of college coaches, especially young freshmen, sophomore in college, you got to put numbers up. And guys that are at D3 school, we had a kid, I'll tell you a great story. Will Marcourt. He's at UNLV right now, doing really well this year. And Will's at D3 school. He interned at Cape, doing remote training with us for the summer. So not on the team in the Cape, just interning there, using the field, throwing to a chair or a bucket when he could, doing whatever he could to figure it out. It was really gritty. And he put up numbers in D3 and worked his way all up to UNLV and got himself an opportunity. And man, that didn't happen when I was playing.
Right.
Today, if you're that kind of kid, bet on yourself. If you really believe you can do it, bet on yourself. I'm not saying you got to train at KP or anywhere else, but you know what? Bet on yourself. Believe in a coach that can help you and go for it. But do it smart. And I think that's. I said this the other day to some of our staff and some of our players. I said, guys, it's not about the flashy things you see or the new shiny toy you see on Instagram. It's about the basics. So if you can't evaluate the basics first, then, you have to, ultimately go back to that, kind of reestablish the basics and figure out, how to put yourself into a better place to find success, put up those numbers and get an opportunity to get out somewhere else. So.
Yeah, man, that's great. It's amazing. You talk about the basics, strength and conditioning is the same way. Any aspect or piece of the puzzle that is baseball, high level performance, people tend to go towards the sexy or the shiny things, but in strength training, isometrics are undefeated. Being able to centrate the joint and allow it to function properly and produce force timely at the rate that it needs to happen. That's what it's all about. Sure, we'll use VBT, we'll use all kinds of different things, but sticking to the basics is 9 times out of 10 where probably everybody should turn around and go look to. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, really it's workload, strength, and mechanics. Those are the 3 things that we just talk about from a pitching perspective. We call it our KP3 philosophy. So health, it's workload, strength, and mechanics. If you're talking about performance, it's mechanics, strength, health. You flip them. It's a pyramid. You flip it around. So guys who evaluate that, find a way to objectively understand each of those categories, and start to kind of just, hey, this is sort of the way to approach this. We need to get really firm in knowing our progressions of throwing load, get really strong in the areas that matter, and make sure that our mechanics are quality. So
Yep. Pretty simple, but again, can be very high, complex,
right.
and things like that, but conceptually pretty simple. One of the questions I was going to ask earlier, and my brain went to a different route. What are some things that maybe you're reading or learning or kind of diving into since the last time we talked?
Okay. I recently went down the Bondarchuk rabbit hole again. I don't want to get too deep into that, but one of the things I'm studying right now, and first person to hear this, so I'll openly drop this on your podcast first, which is great. But I'm starting to create a new regulatory model for ACR versus strength versus like a velocity-based or regulation models. Basically, about it like this: workload in baseball right now is pretty much governed. If you're going to do it, it's based around ACR, so AC ratio. So those that were listening earlier, acute divided by chronic, that's the ratio. There's a limit, a window, shows your progression rate. That's the easy way to say it. There's new discussions out there around strength. Measuring daily readiness from strength, whether it be forearm testing with something like FlexPro Grip or our shoulder testing from our KP bands. We have about 70,000 shoulder tests in our database right now for our athletes, daily score athletes. With those is paired daily throwing workloads. So we can go in and see how are those daily throwing workloads actually impacting those shoulder strength tests. There's not a lot of correlation. There's other groups out there that are kind of promoting this idea that there's a lot of correlation there, and there's just really not yet. So that's something that we've been studying heavily. But Bondarchuk, I went down the Bondarchuk rabbit hole, back to your question, because when you start looking at different methodologies and training styles and what's out there, Robin Lund and I talked about this last year quite a bit, and I just didn't have the time to do it, but finally went down the rabbit hole again on Bondarchuk, and just came out on the other side realizing I think there is a weight to each of these methodologies. So it's not that we shouldn't just use strength, or we shouldn't use, or sorry, we should, it's not that we should use a strength, or we should use just ACR, or we should use just auto regulation. All three of these things should be measured like pretty regularly for our athletes when we're throwing, especially when we have something like a wearable sensor. It makes it pretty easy to track these things. And then when you select a phase, so for example, if somebody wants to do a velocity phase, I've had multiple people, they come and go, my ACR is great, but man, I just got really beat up or whatever. And I go, yeah, but it's because you put yourself in a velocity phase, and ACR is not going to be really good at predicting the stress of you running down the lane and doing this thing, 20 times. So there's other CNS principles and other problems that come with, the throwing phases that we select. So in that case, we should be using more of our daily readiness strength testing. You should also be built up enough at that point. So your ACR should be pretty consistent. So now we're weighting strength instead of ACR. Some cases, auto-regulation might make sense. Those are sort of some of the things that I'm studying, and you see it a lot in cycling. That's been what I've been probably studying, reading the most, is old cycling research papers around like lactate thresholds and all of that kind of stuff. So super interesting, and maybe the next wave, writing about it in our Winning with Workload course, shameless plug, on our website. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to discuss at length. So yeah,
that's super cool. And man, like early on in my career as a performance coach, like, have you ever read the Soviet sports reviews back in the day? So, like, those are the things that we would dive into back in like 2012, 2013, like early on in my career. People were like, some of my coaches that I worked under, hey, go check this stuff out. And just the way that some of these sports that, the majority of people wouldn't think would have an impact on what you're doing or what I'm doing or what the best in the world are doing from a baseball standpoint, like cycling or cross-country skiing or whatever these things that are happening, tumbling, gymnastics. There's a lot of things that go into this. So I'm really I'm glad I asked that question because that's some really cool stuff. I haven't heard
Yeah.
about body check in a while. So, and especially you don't hear that from most pitching guys. So kudos to you for jumping on that. That's
I
really
would, I
cool.
would, I would say this, and I think it's relevant to be brought up, but we have a lot of baseball is in baseball, and we have a lot of thinking that the arm needs time off, and I'm not arguing one way or for or against, right? We just need enough time to build back up. In most cases, would be my argument for it. But I think we have a lot of baseball isms, and all from good people trying to do the right things with research over the years or whatever. And research gets old, things get stagnant, people get set in their ways or their ideas. And then those things get challenged. And, we like to on Twitter say you're stupid and, try to argue that, but it's not about that. Right. It's taking inspiration from places that maybe you never thought about before. And with the advent of technology and the growth of tech today, you have things like cycling, for example. They were using power meters in 2012, 2013 on their pedals that were telling them cadence of their power output, cadence of their actual pedal stroke, all these different things. So guys like Chris Froome and Team Sky, there's so much research and innovation how they implemented those technologies. And you go, that's the same thing we're doing with wearable technology on a throwing arm in baseball. How do we best construct these models? Where can we learn from them to maybe cut the learning down even shorter, and then invent something that makes more sense for the throwing motion specifically? There's a lot of really, really great places to get, just inspiration from. And that's the one thing I would say to anybody who's kind of maybe on the coaching side of this. It's implementing testing strategies that have no merit and not checking them with your peers is reckless. But working through ideas and finding a circle that you can kind of vet out some really dumb ideas first, but then find some maybe gold in the rough. Like I said, in the wintertime, sometimes we have our guys that, I'm kind of like, probably should have wrote that up different, but I'm hypercritical of the way I design things, but I program, and pitching coaches need to become great programmers in many cases to give their athletes the best chance at finding on-field success and developing themselves the way they want to, much in the way, again, high-level cycling and other sports have done it. It's happening. Technology is coming. You shouldn't be scared of it, and we should embrace it. It'll impact and embrace. It'll change these baseball isms that I think have kind of permeated our industry for a long time. So
yeah, that's great. I think that's beautiful, man. I think that's very awesome. Man, we've kind of dove into a lot of different things. What are maybe a couple of things that you would want to leave for really? Maybe let's look at a couple different groups. Maybe like the coaches that we were just speaking to, the players, the parents. Like if you could leave 1 to 2 things, on this show, like what would it be?
Yeah, start off with players. That's the easy one. At the end of the day, I think it's really easy, like we talked about earlier, to get caught in the weeds of looking on social media. Today, social media has given us access to an echo chamber of, maybe not always great ideas, but ideas that look cool, and people doing them regularly. So get great at the basics. Learn the basics first off. Learn the basics, right? Get with a coach who's willing to teach you not just how to hold your hands and how to put your leg in a certain place, right? But a coach is willing to give you educational materials to look into a certain way. I don't always talk about this, but I trained at Driveline back in 2015 at one time. And, one of the inspirations for me for starting what I did, I had gone through a lot of things in my career, but I went into Kyle Body's office and asked Kyle, I said, hey, is there anything I should be reading? He handed me a book called Triphasic Training, and I read it that night. And great book. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And it came back the next day, and his question to me was, what'd you learn? And I said, I read this. He goes, what'd you learn? And I said, I think we need to be bench pressing more in baseball. And he goes, I love that. And so that player to coach, Kyle wasn't really a coach. He just was in his office designing the system that we know today. Back then it was just like a little warehouse and a couple of guys. But, that relationship, that's what you're looking for. If you can find somebody that can spur that, that gave me so much inspiration and idea to my own training at the time and ways I needed to improve things, and But again, if you're not consistent as an athlete, you can't do the basics. None of that matters. So learn the basics, be consistent at it. That's recommendations to athletes. I love the ideas of workload management. Everybody has some workload management system out there, whether it's pitch counts, innings limits, it's all workload management. Choose a better workload management system. That's important. And I understand it's not always easy right now. It's sort of a new thing in baseball, but find people that'll do it for you, that'll help you with it, and do it appropriately, but stick to it. Stick to, biomechanics. If you're trying a drill for the first time, learn to fail, learn to be okay in failure, and learn to grow from failure, saying, hey, over time, I continued to try that. It just didn't work for me. But here's what I learned from that. And I think that's the key. Not just it didn't work for me, but here's what I learned from that. And that's my recommendation to athletes. Parents, pretty easy. If we want to talk about parents, take a deep breath, enjoy the ride. It's not something ultimately that you can do for your kid. They're going to have to do it for themselves. I can't tell you how many times a dad has walked into my office and sat down with me on assessment day, about a 2-hour assessment in our place. And dad will come into our office and go, after I've done TrackMan and biomechanics analysis and workload management analysis and range of motion screening, jump tests, all this stuff. Dad will, he just doesn't listen to old dad here. So I'm hoping we put him here and he'll listen to you. And I go, am I supposed to just be regurgitating what you say to him? Or are you saying that like what you say is what I'm going to say as well? Like you think we're on the same page? I do this full time for a living. You run a financial business. Like we do this. I do this full time, not calling anybody else specific, just made up the financial business thing. But, it's a dad. And I understand this. It's a dad who is been involved in the process for so long. And maybe for the first time, they're letting their kid go and they're letting them they're trusting somebody else to teach their kid. So with all respect for where that statement comes from, I think it does though show when a kid's 16 years old and the dad's still saying that, I go, okay, like you're invested, you're a little too involved in that process. Like take a step back, let your kid work. Let's find out who he is. And almost make numbers, but almost 100% of the time when I hear that statement from the dad, the kid doesn't know how to work hard. And I wrote a blog about this. I call it the difference between genies and coaches. Genies rub a magic wand. They do a single session. They put your hand somewhere and go, look, and you throw a good pitch and they go, see, it worked. Coaches are there to push you to failure and they're not there to be your friend. They're there to coach you. They're going to push you to failure, find out where your weaknesses are and help you grow through them. So they're going to break you down. They're going to build you up. They're going to break you down. They're going to build you up. Oftentimes when we talk about, parents being too involved, what happens is the kid becomes coddled because if the kid's not having success, the parent steps in and the kid potentially never learns how to actually learn through failure. So parents, just take a deep breath, step back, let some people that know what they're doing, trust them to do their job. I think that's sort of the key in the entire process. And then lastly, coaches, I will give a little bit of a hypercritical advice here to coaches, which is I think today's landscape, everybody's picking teams because it's the popular thing to do. It's starting to dissipate a little bit, but for a long time was what YouTube channel do you watch the most or what book did you read? And you were implementing that strategy and all of a sudden it's, I stand by this flag. And we put up our course a year ago. We did a years in the past for workload stuff, but I didn't offer a certification because quite frankly, I wasn't comfortable with the idea of somebody putting KP workload certified on their Twitter. I didn't think that it brought any value. The only thing that you were using that for is potentially get a job. I want our courses, I want our approach, our education to be thought provoking, but I want people to iterate and change the system. And as a coach, you should be looking at things hypercritically and trying to solve problems for yourself, not just getting the cookie cutter approach to saying that I stand under this flag and therefore I am a good pitching coach. You serve your athletes, and by you serving your athletes, that means you show up for them both as a person and then so in person as a person, as an educator behind the scenes, which means you have to be educated. So my encouragement to coaches is ask hard questions, try to solve hard questions, try to find answers with volume. Don't just settle on here's 10 pitches from one athlete and this is how I validated myself. Do the hard things. And it means that you're going to have to stay late hours. It means that you're not going to get paid enough to do the things that matter. But if you really believe in serving the athlete and the long-term impact that you have on your players, then this is why you're here. And industry words, stick with it, keep moving. That's the mantra. So
all three groups that we talked to there, beautifully said. That was awesome, Casey. Where can people find more about you, Kinetic Pro, what you're doing, and if people want to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Yeah. So I'm a little feisty on Twitter, but you can follow me at Casey Mulholland on Twitter. I tend to just research stuff, and then some people chirp at me and I chirp back. It's fine. We're all there for good reasons. And then so maybe more of the spicy side of it. KineticProBaseball.com is our website. We just released our new course, Winning with Workload. That's going to fall under, you see this actually change in the next couple of days, KP3 community. So we're doing both annual memberships to that and lifetime access payment. We'll get all of our courses, a lot more on the pipeline. Response to the LB injuries report coming soon. It's like 68 pages or something like that. Winning with Workload just was released. Our bands course was released about a year ago. So a ton of resource there for people if you're wanting to learn. Our blog also on that website has a ton of value there. And then Instagram, it's at Kinetic Pro Performance. All of our day-to-day activities. If you're looking to sign up and get started with us and you want to do something, just hit our assessment link online on our website. If you're looking to get more information on how to grow a coach, whatever, again, just reach out. My personal email is casey@kineticprobaseball.com. I welcome all the time conversation, anybody that wants to have it. So
awesome. Well, thanks, Casey. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for all the conversation we had there tonight. It was awesome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course.